Hello, I'm Patricia Dinkler, and I'm here to introduce you to Mitch Mitchell, who is just an outstanding citizen and individual. He's a man of service, he's a leader, and near and dear to my heart, he is a mentor to youth. He demonstrated leadership at a very early age. He grew up here in Sheldon, went to high school there. He was elected 4 consecutive years in a row as president of his class, went on to college. After graduating from college, entered the military, where he retired after 33 years of service as a general in the Air Force. Paralleling that time, he was also an airline captain, retired from that profession after 35 years of service. What is really interesting is you would think that would be enough of his time, but living in Seattle, Mitch became involved with the Aerospace Museum there, and we will talk more about that later in the segment, but where he mentored 300 plus disadvantaged youth. In 2015, Mitch came back to Beaufort, returned home, and I have to read this list because it's quite impressive in such a short period of time what he has already completed in service to our Beaufort community. He has been on the Beaufort History Museum Board, Penn Center Board, Heirs Property Coordinator. He was on the Beaufort County Planning Commission, Page Point Cemetery Restoration Project Leader, South Carolina Poll Leader and Manager, and Tuskegee Airmen Student Aviation Youth Coordinator in Walterboro. So as you can see, he's a man of purpose, of determination, and we are very fortunate to have him here with us today to discuss some of his objectives if he is to be elected as city council, on the city council. Mitch, thank you for agreeing to do this. This is just awesome.
Well, thank you, Pat. Thank you very much.
Facebook participants have sent in several questions that they wanted to ask of you. If it's okay with you, I'd like to go ahead and go right into that. How would you handle the homeless issue in Beaufort?
Well, again, thanks to you for supporting my campaign.
Absolutely.
And thanks to the supporter who sent that question in. I first noticed the homeless problem doing our setup for the March for Justice, which took place, as you know, on Father's Day back in June.
And that was for Mr. George Floyd, right?
That was, yes, that was in support of Mr. George Floyd. And while we were setting up, a young lady came up and we struck up a conversation. And eventually it evolved around to, where are you from and where do you live? And when I asked her the question, she said, well, I live right here. So I said, well, I'm thinking she lives in Beaufort, right? And she said, I said, where in Beaufort do you live? And she said, right here, right at the pavilion. And I said, you live right here? And I was lost for words. Sure. At that point, I really, I didn't want to misspeak, but I really had no words of encouragement or support for her. But it really weighed heavily on my heart. So I started asking, because I hadn't really noticed homeless persons in the way I've noticed them in larger cities that I've lived, on
Sure.
the streets and so forth. So I started asking, and my wife and I started discussing, where are the homeless folks? And it turns out that I guess the homeless problem here is a little more significant than we thought. And at night, I was told if you go down to the pavilion at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll see the problem. Persons have seen homeless or discovered homeless persons in their backyard or in abandoned cars. I think we as a city can do better than that. These are our fellow human beings.
Absolutely.
For whatever reason, they're in unfortunate situations. I think we should try to partner with the surrounding cities, Ridgeland, here at Port Royal or Bluffton, sure. Even maybe Savannah, to try to create a place where they have a safe haven, that they can go, they can get the help they need, if they have, and many of them do, have mental challenges, whether they had it when they became homeless or they, eventually evolved into that situation due to the stress of just trying to live day to day, where hopefully we can give these persons the help they need
That's
and
so
return
wonderful
them to
to
a
hear.
productive, situation where they can have some pride about themselves.
And don't you feel that, just educating the people, the citizens, is such a large part of it so that they understand how they can participate in this program? Because like you mentioned earlier, it's really just such a taboo subject. And education just takes it such a long way.
Oh, I totally agree. I often think of someone who has a broken leg or a broken ankle in a cast, everyone
They
wants to
know what's
autograph
wrong,
it, right?
right.
But if that person has challenges mentally, we kind of discard them, or he's crazy or whatever. Well, we as a society need to evolve to the point where there's no more shame, no disgrace
Thank you.
than having a
yeah.
physical ailment.
Absolutely. Well, with all of that being said, where would the monies come from that? Have you given that much thought?
Yeah, I have given it a thought, because money is always, you have to have funding to make these things happen. So I learned in listening to a program just recently how much more difficult it is to get doctors to request help through Medicare and Medicaid for mental illnesses. It really takes a longer time than if someone just goes in with a stomach ache, a broken leg, or so forth. So I think that whole thinking has to change. And then I also think, because this problem is not unique to any one city. It's certainly not unique to Beaufort. It's not unique to South Carolina, or it's a national problem, and indeed an international problem. So I think the funding needs to come from those sources. If the state is providing funding to the municipalities and the counties, that certainly benefits the local communities.
Absolutely.
But it makes South Carolina a better state, right? And then the federal government should put their share in too, because it's taking care of all of our citizens. So the funding, I think, should come from both federal and state primarily, and not be burdened just by the local community.
Well, that really leads into something that may or may not be compatible to this. We had a question from Andrew Conlon. How do you plan to help with affordable housing in Beaufort? And
Yeah, well, affordable housing, kind of goes back into that safe haven thing. Someone who has their own property or own anything that is theirs tend to take better care of it, right?
Right.
So as I go about the area, I know we have professionals, firemen, teachers, that are challenged with getting housing. We have folks who are here who are not in those categories, but they have regular jobs and maybe not a college degree, who are strained with trying to afford their houses to pay the taxes on it. We have vacant lots in the city that can accommodate, or even houses that are in somewhat of a state of disrepair, that if repaired can be very attractive. The historical nature of it could be maintained in many cases, or protected.
Very necessary.
But I think there's an affordable housing trust that has been shared with me or discussed with me, with folks more familiar and has been in the construction business for years. An example of that it took place up in Greenville, where they took just a couple $1 million. They formed this housing trust, and they leveraged this housing trust into I think $25, $26 million. So if you could have a trust like that, where a person we'll just use 100,000 as a round figure, that we determine what is the level of income and what percentage of that income should be supported, based on the area. And in Beaufort County, believe it or not, Beaufort is kind of, on a per capita income, we're kind of at the top along with Charleston. So imagine that the cost here, the it may be necessary to subsidize a larger portion for those people who can't afford a house. So let's say the house is $100,000, and maybe that trust fund can provide 40% of it, and the person who's trying to purchase the house pays the other 60%.
That's excellent. Mm-hmm.
That way, they could either restore their house or maybe build a house. At some point, maybe the investor or the trust fund gets made whole as time goes on, but that individual ends up owning that house. And when there's ownership of the house,
Pride of ownership.
Pride of ownership in the house, it translates into better neighborhoods,
Absolutely.
safer neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Because no one wants a dilapidated house right next to their good house, so it becomes kind of contagious. And that neighborhood begins to develop a character of a nice place to live because the people there have ownership of their property.
And they become a cohesive unit. It just goes back to
Exactly.
Whew, this is exciting. I
It is exciting.
would like to see this all happen.
And I think it can happen.
Yeah. Next question. If Beaufort were to receive $1 million grant, what would you do with it? I think I can guess what some of it would go for.
Well, you know, I'm all about inspiring and supporting our youth. And in today's dollars, $1 million is not a whole lot of money, but who would turn their back on $1 million? So I think that $1 million should go to a program that would support our students, our children, especially toward that gap from the time they get out of school. And one day this whole COVID thing is going to pass,
Right.
and we're going to get back to normalcy. And students will be getting out of school around 3 o'clock. And many of these students have parents both working. There's kind of this danger zone between what does that student do between the time they get out of school and the time their parents join them at home.
Right.
I think if we had something like a Boys and Girls Club,
Excellent.
okay, or something resembling a Boys and
Compatible
Girls
to
Club,
that.
where the student leaves directly from school, they go to that safe haven Boys and Girls Club, they could exercise their body, there would be Wi-Fi, computers, tutors. And I know, just talking to a neighbor just recently as yesterday, he brought up to me, he said, you know, we older folks have lots of expertise and talents just waiting to be tapped.
Absolutely.
We could be tutors for those students. So now, if the student can get all their homework done, they get home, I don't know, 5:30, 6 o'clock, they have dinner, you can get into a normal rhythm, get a good night's rest, and that situation just repeats itself.
And what a beautiful thing that is for the community, because like you, in discussing with different people, different ideas, what other gap is the youth and the elderly people, or the older, which we might be considered, and how we can each learn from each other and give to one another. And for those young people who don't have families, they become a family member. That's such a great resource and great idea, Mitch.
It is a great resource, great idea. I like to think of my web developer, Mr. Jamie Fleming. So Jamie works at the Digital Corridor. And we met a young man, I think I'll say his name, his first name is Eric. And I thought about that. I said, how great it is that my web developer has this young man, I think he was in 11th grade.
Oh, and that's exactly what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about,
That's exactly what we're talking
so
about.
So all these folks who are
Tying
professional
everybody in together.
engineers, architects, whatever they may be, what a great way. We all, yeah, it's true for me, I think it is true for most people. Most of us had someone in our life that influenced us.
Absolutely.
And it says, I want to be like that person. And not only that, many of us just need someone to tell us that we can do it.
Well, it's a mentor.
It's a mentor.
And it's a mentor is what they become. Yeah. And I do want you to speak to a little bit of the program that you worked with in Seattle at the Aerospace Museum, speaking of mentoring.
Yes,
and how maybe some of those techniques could be applied.
Wonderful program. We started a program called the Michael P. Anderson Memorial Aerospace Program.
Right.
And the whole idea was that Michael Anderson was one of the astronauts on the Columbia shuttle accident from Spokane, Washington. And at the time, the accident, Governor Gregoire was heading up the state, and at the memorial service, she said, you know, we're having all these speeches and we'll build statues, but we need to do more than that.
Absolutely.
He was too great a person to not leverage his legacy for the benefit of students. Mm-hmm. And Michael loved students. He spent so much time in the classroom.
Oh, yeah.
The one time I saw Michael was at a convention, the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals, and the Tuskegee Airmen Convention in Las Vegas. And he was the Youth Day speaker.
Isn't that?
That was the summer before the accident.
Oh,
okay?
Yeah.
So when they asked me to tap into it, you know, it's just like, you know, it just was the perfect fit for me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will tell you that, so we partnered with the Museum of Flight in Seattle. And it started off, and we started in 2009. And for the first 5 years of that program, on the Michael P. Anderson Day at the Museum of Flight, we had an astronaut there.
How
the first astronaut that came to
Exceptional.
speak was none other than my good buddy Charlie, right from Columbia.
There you go.
4 shuttle missions.
Outstanding.
Okay.
That's wonderful.
So it was so inspiring that the Museum of Flight adopted the program and made it one of their official education programs.
Good for you.
And the funding from companies like Alaska Airlines and Boeing was just, we never had to worry about the money. We could do the same thing here.
Absolutely.
Because I think, I don't think, I know, our most valuable resource are our people. And the most valuable of all of those people are our youth, because they will be the you and me of tomorrow. Yes.
I want to participate in whatever program that you set up. And I'm very serious when I say that. Is there anything else from that program or from that time frame that you would like to say before going to the next question?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the program. I was one of the 4 co-founders of the program. I know that it works. We've had students that started with us initially back in 2009 that have gone on to become engineers and many, lawyers, doctors. While the program does have an aerospace slant to it, we're not pushing,
Sure.
that you have to fly a jet or anything.
Right.
Or, although many of our students say they want to be astronauts,
Sure,
I'll tell you
and that's fine.
which is good. But we can do the same thing here, and we have the expertise. We have the people. We just have to get it organized.
What about the Tuskegee Airmen group that
Yes.
you work with in
Yes.
Walterboro?
Yes.
Are there any parallels with that you could draw from?
Definitely, definite parallels. Our chapter out of Walterboro, we are partnered with pilots. They volunteer their time.
Right.
They volunteer their airplane and their fuel. We just
Right.
have to bring the students.
Sure.
And so far, the program was going on before I got here, but I've been participating in it ever since 2016. And primarily our students have been coming from the churches, but our plans are to expand it into the school system and to grow the program. So I think the program that we have still exists, have in Seattle, is perfectly adaptable right here.
That's terrific. And when you're talking about even our schools here and having seniors mentor student, it doesn't have to be just an after-school program.
Oh, no.
The guidance counselors in schools are so overloaded, and like you said, we have so many resources here, and people who do want to give up their time.
Yes, and the retirees are itching to do things like that, and it's a good thing, that feeling of helping someone and being blessed with the opportunity and the resources to do that, to give back.
Well, we're certainly grateful that you're deciding to do this, but what really pushed you over the edge, so to speak, to go ahead and take on the responsibility of running for city council? Because we know of your generosity, we know of your leadership and your commitment, but this is another big leap for you at this stage.
Yeah, especially, you're right, it's a big leap. But but it was a natural evolution
I can see
of
that.
events. It was an unfortunate evolution because the one thing that really said, okay, Mitch, you know, I should get involved in a more proactive way, was the killing of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
That was such a raw, painful,
Mm-hmm.
I think, un-American thing.
I'm so glad you brought that back up again, because we in this community have come together on so many causes. I mean, it's so varied, having lived here as long as I have. And how wonderful it would be to have a cause that helps us all let our empathy for humankind mature.
Yes.
And bring it to the forefront, and not have it as just something that's already happened. And
Well,
again, it's education
exactly.
and empathy.
And Pat, I know, well, when I was convincing my wife to come home to Beaufort with me, I kept telling her about the wonderful place Beaufort is.
Sure.
Now, I might have been a little subjective, you know, being a Beaufort boy myself, but I really believe that. And I said, sweetheart, I can guarantee you that give it a little time and everyone will embrace you.
I was going to use that
Yes.
exact same word. I've never been in a community that embraces
Right.
newcomers more beautifully and sincerely.
And I think when George was killed, I needed to know, I needed reassurance that Beaufort was still that place.
And it is.
And the March for Justice is what it was. It was a march for justice. In some ways, it was kind of selfish on my part because I needed to see who would come, and I was
I can see how that defined
relieved.
this.
I was relieved on the day of the march. I kind of started getting a feeling because some across the spectrum were asking me about the march. You know, the city was very supportive of it. You know, press releases and so forth, churches. I had a feeling that it was going to be well attended, but I was even more impressed by the diversification of those who attended, which was pretty much representative of the diversity in the city.
That's great.
And
Yep.
And that kind of was settling for me.
Absolutely.
And then after the march, it was, okay, maybe we could leverage this momentum to do something even more lasting. And as we kept discussing that, you know, those who I was discussing it with, we said, okay, maybe we should try to do things on an individual basis that are really dear to our heart. You know, some folks said we got to get Wi-Fi, you know, especially out in the countryside.
And we're doing that.
And we're doing that, yeah.
I'm actually involved with a program that's doing that.
Awesome. Well, we need to talk more
Yeah,
about
we'll
that.
talk about that,
Okay.
because and of course, COVID has really brought it to
Yeah.
a head.
Yes, exactly.
Speaking of things coming to a head, what's recent in the news today, and you, after being in the Air Force, serving your country, retiring as a general after 33 years, I would really love to hear what your thoughts are about Paris Island and the discussion of closing Paris Island.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, you know, I'm an airman to the heart.
Right.
But I got a lot of Marine in me.
Yeah.
I started out in
You
the Corps.
started out
I
as
started out in the Corps
that's
right
right.
here. You know, I was, yes. But well, you know, the thought of Paris Island and the legacy of all that's happened here leaving Beaufort is a little unthinkable. But I think we would make a mistake if we don't start mobilizing now to do all we can to keep Paris Island here. I am sure that the Marine generals that are thinking about this, they're thinking about those Marines they need to train to defend our country.
You're exactly
And
right.
they will do, as they should, what is best to make sure those Marines are ready to fight. Now, whether that happens in Beaufort or whether that happens in someplace else is to be determined. But I think for us, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of support. I mean, San Diego is great, and a lot of Marines trained over there.
No, but
but when
Paris
you start
Island is
thinking of
Paris
the history,
Island.
it's Paris Island, okay, right here in
Right
Little
here.
Beaufort. You know, on the selfish side, you know, there are economic reasons, but I mean, Paris Island, I mean, been here as long as I've been living. I mean, everyone talks about Paris Island is Beaufort is Paris Island, Paris Island is Beaufort.
And I can testify to that, and all the different people I've met through my life. Time when they say, "Where are you from?" or "Where do you live?" I'd say Beaufort, South Carolina, and they would say, "Isn't that where Paris Island
Exactly.
is?"
I same here. I mean, I spent a lot of my life, out west, and I said, "Well, I'm from Beaufort," and they go, "Really? I've never heard of that." And I go, "Well, you know where Paris Island is?" "Oh yeah."
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I said, "Well, that's my home,
something.
right there at Paris Island."
Well.
Yes.
Well, I can't thank you enough for this commitment to run for city council, and there's nothing I can say more than that than thank you for your continued service to pursuing this goal. And from me and from all of you, we will say welcome home.
Well, thank you, Pat. It's good to be home.